All right, so we'll start. And there's actually a delay. I'm actually streaming from Zoom to YouTube, so there's a delay. So hopefully everything I say you'll hear, and that the volume is working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a short lecture, just a general lecture about barn owls, and then we'll go to question and answers. So any questions you have, right in the chat, and I'll try to get to everybody's question in the end. And if for some reason I miss yours, if you can repost it in the chat after, that'll be great. So 1 second, we'll start right now. So I hope this really works, because this technology thing of zooming in YouTube is my first. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about barn owls. Obviously, everybody knows the live cameras, but behind that, we also have a lot of research projects. So we're going to start with a short lecture about barn owls, and we're going to go into the question and answers. But before that, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I did my PhD and finished in 2010 in Tel Aviv University. Well, I'm a senior researcher at the Shamir Research Institute and senior lecturer at the University of Haifa. And I love barn owls. I've been researching them since 2005. Definitely my favorite bird. And beyond that, I'm a father of two beautiful girls. So in my research group, as I mentioned, part of the Shamir Research Institute and the University of Haifa, and the Charter Group BirdCam YouTube channel is basically funded mainly by an anonymous donor and also by the crowdfunding. And our main goal was to, share with the public some of the things that we do in our normal day of researching, but with the least amount of intervention as possible. We try to keep things as natural as possible, even though I understand they're nesting boxes. And we have 9 amazing moderators from 8 different countries. And without their help, we would not be able to do this channel at all. So when you see the channel, you see the cameras, but behind the cameras, there's sometimes complicated systems. Some of the nests are in very difficult places. For example, the vulture feeding station, there's one in the desert. So in order to stream there, we actually have to set up systems using solar panels and very large batteries. So sometimes they're very complicated. That's actually what I like most about this streaming thing. It's not actually the streaming, but all the technology and the fact that we can go someplace without electricity and internet and stream from there. And we've had in the last year, 6 barn owl cameras, 2 in the US and 4 in Israel. And this right here, you can see a typical barn owl camera setup. That you have the camera inside the box and you have a camera outside of the box. And these cameras also, for me, I've been researching barn owls for years, but it's one thing to research them and go to boxes and see the barn owls, but it's another thing when you have cameras. And what these cameras let us do is see different behaviors and activities that the barn owls do that we typically will not be able to see. For example, this has come about more than once. What does a first date look like in a barn owl box? 1 sec. So this is a male inside of the box. He gets very excited. The female comes. He doesn't give her, buy her coffee or anything like that. Attacks her a little bit and immediately mates with her. So this is something that come across about more than once, that these barn owls are very aggressive at first. In the first couple nights of this pair bonding is very, very aggressive. But then after that, within a night or two, then they start preening each other and relaxing. So this is something that we've seen on these live cameras that I didn't know how that worked. Competition between birds is something that's very common. But again, sometimes you have these surprises. Like I'm sure most of you probably saw this with the female kestrel getting a little bit too close inside of the box. And so luckily this female kestrel was able to escape with her life. But these are the types of interactions that typically we don't see because it happened within a few seconds, a couple minutes. And if you don't have a 24/7 camera on them, you just miss this altogether. For example, one of the biggest things that we learn from these cameras is the interaction between barn owls and pigeons. This we really didn't know existed before these live cameras. We would find sometimes pigeons inside of the boxes, but we didn't know how common these interactions are and how impressive the pigeons are. You know, pigeons, they just don't give up. So in this case, you know, we got to see these pigeons coming and laying eggs, even enacting barn owl boxes. And this was very excited, you know, I don't know if any of you saw the...
Welcome to the bloody owl's nest. As we can see, the parents are out. These cheeky buggers are home alone, and...
So that's the Aussie man, a famous guy from Australia that made a nice clip about that. So last year we had 3 such cases with pigeons laying in active barn owl boxes. And this year we haven't had pigeons laying in active barn owl boxes, but we do have the pigeons returning to boxes after barn owls fledged and laying eggs. So right now in camera 4 and 2, there's active pigeon pairs with eggs. Unfortunately, when in camera 2, the barn owls decided to come back and are disturbing them every night. So one of the great things about barn owls is their breeding completely varies between different areas in the world. For example, in the tropics, typically barn owls have multiple broods and much smaller broods, whereas in temperate regions, they have much larger broods. So the barn owl, the number of nestlings varies greatly between one region to the other. And we can see this even with latitudes. So like in the old world in Europe, when the higher the latitude, actually the smaller the broods they have. And when you decrease in latitudes, they have more nestlings. So it's very, very dynamic. And even in a tiny country like Israel, you see her here in the yellow, in between different field sites, study sites we have in Israel, the number of nestlings per brood varies. It's not the same. It varies between habitats and different sites. So why am I telling this? You know, I've been researching barn owls for years, but I think I know a lot. But a lot of the stuff I know is specific to Israel. And when you go to different areas, what is right in one location is not always right in another location. So it's very important to understand when you look at these different camps throughout the world, the number of brood size and stuff like that varies so greatly, and it's unique. So most of our cameras, other than the 2 in Florida, are located in Israel, which, as you know, is a super tiny country located in the Middle East. Unfortunately, we get a little bit bad press because of our conflict with our neighbors, with war. And it probably has to do with our army, which if you ever decide to come to Israel, be careful. They're everywhere, even at the beach. But other than the army, I wish people would know other things about Israel. For example, like Wonder Woman, Gal Gadot's Israeli. But in addition to that, I really wish people knew that when you look at our barn owl population, we have one of the largest barn owl populations in the world. We have close to 225 pairs in some of our valleys per 100 kilometers squared, in comparison to Europe that have a lot less. So it's a very, very dense population of barn owls. I think it's similar in places like Florida. Actually, they have very dense populations also, but it's very, very high in this area. So that one of the things that farmers use the barn owls here is for biological pest control agents or rodents. The idea is instead of using harmful rodenticides, pesticides that kill rodents, the farmers add these nest boxes. The barn owls come and eat the rodents. So this has been going on since 1981 in Israel. And we look at a map in Israel, this is the south of Israel to the north. All those red dots are nest boxes. So they're spread throughout. And the majority of these boxes, 90-something% of them at least, are purchased by the farmers themselves. And a box costs about $300 in Israel. Very expensive because wood is expensive. And these are purchased mainly by farmers. It's a grassroots bottom-up project led by the farmers themselves. They're the ones who actually purchase most of the boxes. And we have all different sites in Israel. And this is an example of a site. All those little dots, white boxes, are nesting boxes. In a field like this, between 20 to 65 or 75% of them can be occupied yearly. The variation depends mainly on the amount of rodents. And the idea is very simple. Instead of using rodenticides, which are harmful, obviously, for the environment, as I don't know if you know, but rodenticides are made specifically to kill mammals because rodents are mammals, but we're also mammals, so they're very harmful. So instead of using these rodenticides, the farmers add the nest boxes in hope that when the barn owls come, they'll eat the rodents. So how does it work? It's not a complicated idea at all. It's actually very simple. Barn owls are missing, there's a lack of nest sites in agriculture. When you go to an agricultural field, there's tons and tons of rodents. Why? Because the farmers grow crops, which the rodents like. So the population of rodents increases very large, way above natural numbers. But the number of predators are less because, for example, barn owls, they don't have a place to breed. So farmers buy and add these nest boxes. The barn owls come and lay an egg. They lay one egg about every 2 or 3 days. But unlike songbirds, chickens, or that lay all their eggs and after incubate them, and then when they do that, all the nestlings hatch on the same day. Barn owls, they lay one egg every 2 to 3 days, but she incubates from the first egg on. So you have this huge difference in size between the number of nestlings. When there's enough food, they can all survive. When there's not enough food, as the younger ones unfortunately die. In Israel, this is very common because when there's enough food, they actually fledge typically way more barn owls than most other places in the world. So it's very common to have 6 nestlings in a box. So when enough food, they all survive. When it's not, the smallest one dies. And the reason why, it basically prevents competition between the nestlings, the difference in size, sorry. So when you, for example, if I had 2 children and they were similar in ages and I brought one piece of pizza, I put it on the table and I said, okay, I'm going to go to the other room, have fun. So the 2 siblings, the kids would fight out for the pizza. But if one is physically larger than the other, almost like me and my older brother, the older one would give the younger one, a couple slaps around and he would eat the food. And then the next time, the younger one, like me with my older brother, wouldn't even ask for the pizza. I understood that he would take it. But if the 2 siblings are similar in size, and they would fight it out, and that fighting is not energy efficient, it's a waste of energy. So the difference in size prevents all this interbrood competition between the nestlings. So, but when there's enough food, they all survive, they all get along. And that's ideal, but the goals of the barn owls is to raise as many nestlings as they can. Unfortunately, this doesn't happen all the time, so it's very frequent that that some of the smaller ones unfortunately die, in Israel in particular. So a pair of barn owls, we say, a family, parents and the nestlings eat between 2,000 to 6,000 rodents a year. The difference in the number of rodents depends also on what rodents they eat, because there's all different size rodents. But as you can see, if you watch camera 6, they consistently bring some of these pairs lots and lots of rodents. Between 15 to 20 rodents can be common. In particular, you'll see in a minute, but some broods get it even higher up, 8, 9, 10 nestlings. They got to bring lots of rodents. So this is actually the field study site in the Hula Valley. We have cameras 4 and 6 there. So this is an example of all the nesting boxes in that area. There's about 150 nesting boxes, which is a lot. So a lot of people, they always say, you got to add more nesting boxes to give the pigeons a place to breed. Well, they have them. There's plenty of boxes there. And believe it or not, some of the boxes are completely empty. And for some reason, the pigeons prefer these active boxes or old boxes used for barn owls. And it's an interesting fact that sometimes they found also with songbirds that birds prefer actually nests used by other species. So here's an example. Camera 4 is located around here. And camera 6 is located, I think, about 3 kilometers away over here. So the site is quite huge. But the barn owls, they definitely overlap their hunting range, and they probably even see each other once in a while. When we look at the number of nesting boxes occupied in this same site, it varies between the years. The most of variation is probably has to do with the amount of rodents. So you can see this huge fluctuation by the percentage of nesting boxes occupied per year. And also the mean number of the nestlings, the average number of nestlings per brood also varies. Some years when there's more rodents, they successfully fledge more young. For example, we had a year in 2019 that the average number of nestling per pair was something like 6.6, which is crazy. That means each pair fledged 6.6 nestlings. Some of them had even 11 nestlings. Some had less, but and this is what 11 nestlings look in one of these nesting boxes. That's another thing. A lot of people say the nesting boxes are too small. I can say that when there's enough food, they fledge these 11 nestlings without any problem at all. And it's very difficult. A lot of times people are used to seeing these live cameras in nesting boxes that people make specifically for the owls. And if you make one for the camera, for a camera, ideally you want a larger box because then you can video it better. A lot of our boxes were not made for adding these live cameras, but we added the live cameras after, so they're smaller. But if you go to a natural cavity in a tree, you'll never find a huge cavity. Typically they're small. So when we look at the number of nestlings per pier, this is 220 piers since 2012 to 2019 in the Hula Valley. So you can see the fledge between 1 to 11 nestlings, but the majority of them on average is 5.4 nestlings a pier. But you see this huge fluctuation and the number of nestlings is quite high. And also the laying date, which is very important, also fluctuates from mid-March up to the end of March. And typically the earlier laying pairs are more successful than the later laying pairs. That's why we always put the cameras up typically in the later laying pairs in Hula Valley, because we'll never add cameras on boxes while they're incubating, because that could just cause them to abandon the clutch. So some of the cameras we have up before the breeding season, but the ones we add during the breeding season, we do that only after the nestlings have hatched. So a lot of the research we did was try to help farmers. First of all, we have a manual that's free online that farmers can download it, that has the exact measurements, how to build a box, the ones that we suggest, and also information where to put materials and all different other information. But one of the first things we did, all the older nesting boxes used to look like this, that it was a flat box. And what the problem with these nesting boxes is the nestlings would fall. So I heard a lecture in 2010 from, I think, the British Trust from the UK, and they have a style of box that prevents, unfortunately, these nestlings falling. So what happens, the parents bring food and the nestlings jostle to get the food and one pushes the other off. When a nestling falls, the parents will not continue to feed it. They typically die or they're predated. So we had these other types of nesting boxes that we took the idea from the British Trust from the UK, and we actually called them the UK styled nesting boxes. And the great thing, what we see in these live cameras is that the the nestlings actually do not reach the boxes until they're around 45 to 50 days old. So that prevents them from falling, the smaller nestlings from falling. Which is amazing, and it did a good job. The other major problem we had in Israel, we unfortunately don't have any, almost no natural resources, definitely no wood in Israel. So it's all imported, and a lot of the wood is very cheap, inexpensive, and fall apart when you put it outside. So we had to find the correct wood that we could purchase in Israel. We can't, unfortunately, we're very limited to types of wood that we can get, and it's extremely expensive. We also found that height of the nest box is important. Sometimes farmers would put the boxes too low, and what would happen is the barn owls would not use them. So we typically add them about 2.5 to 3 meters high on a pole, higher on a tree, and then the barn owls occupy more. When the farmers put them lower, they wouldn't be occupied as much. The barn owls, they prefer nest boxes with the least amount of disturbance around them. So the more disturbance they have, the less these nest boxes are occupied. And they prefer more open landscape. Barn owls, they hunt in fields. You don't find them really in forest, maybe in the edge of forest, but not within forest. So the more open landscape farmland you have, the more they're occupied. They prefer boxes that are shaded over boxes that are not shaded. So when they're shaded, they're occupied more. When they're exposed to sun, they're occupied less. And another thing that we found is that when we put them on trees, they're occupied more than on poles. So for example, here, if you look at this graph, I'm not trying to kill you with graphs, but as researchers, unfortunately, that's what we use. But you look in the black, in the black bars are boxes occupied in trees. They're more than poles in the white in shade or poles in the sun. So if you put on a box on a tree, at least in Israel, it's occupied more. Why do I say at least in Israel? Because we don't have very many climbing mammals. In Europe, in the US, in Africa, you have different climbing mammals that climb. So if you add a box in a tree, a raccoon or a possum in the US can cause problems, or in Africa, monkeys. So we really don't have many climbing areas. So in Israel, it works very well. But it's very important to note that we put temperature data loggers in the nest boxes. So if you look here in this graph, the outside temperature here, that's the temperature outside. But when you look at the temperature inside the boxes, they're all less than the outside temperature. Now, you would think that a box in the middle of the field that barn owls would cook. It's actually less. So a box on trees, which is shaded, is actually 4.3 degrees Celsius less, which is a lot. If it's in a box in the shade on a pole, it's 3.2 degrees Celsius. And even a box in the sun, it's 1.7 degrees Celsius lower than the outside temperature. So the boxes, that's why sometimes when you look at the outside temperature, you think these barn owls are going to cook, but it is cooler inside of the box. It's still hot. So we found that the diet of the barn owls affects the number of their breeding success. So typically barn owls that eat more voles, the rodents with the small tails, they succeed more than the ones that eat more mice in the jerds. For example, in the Hula Valley, you almost don't see any jerds. You see lots of voles and some mice, whereas in Cam 1, you would see lots of jerds also. One of the major problems throughout the world with barn owls is with roadkills. Barn owls, they fly very low and a lot of times collide with cars and trucks, and they die. So we did a study in 2009 to 2017. We found, unfortunately, 1,000 barn owls. If you see here, the yellow and the blue dots, those are dead barn owls. And you can actually see where the roads are according to where we found the dead barn owls. But luckily, not luckily for researchers at least, we also studied in the same area the breeding of the barn owls. This is not in the Hula Valley, it's a Beit Shan in Israel Valley, is a different valley. And we could also learn when the majority of barn owls were being killed. And the majority were between June and September. These are the areas when the times when barn owls are breeding. A lot of them are fledglings that are leaving the boxes and being killed. And the other interesting thing, we're able to see that the yearly number of barn owls killed was related to the number of breeding pairs and the number of nestlings ringed that year. So that means in years where there were more barn owl pairs and more nestlings, more were killed, which is an interesting thing because in a place where there's lots of barn owls, so in years of more successful years, unfortunately, more will be killed. One other interesting thing is with movement, what do barn owls do at nighttime? You know, traditionally, I couldn't, up to a few years ago, I really couldn't tell you because at nighttime, you can't see what the barn owls are doing. But as a researcher, you know, when we lecture, we can say anything we want because we're the expert. Doesn't mean we're right. So, but in this case, we really didn't know. There were some initial studies in Israel with using radio telemetry. It's an older method that wasn't very accurate. But as everybody knows, with their smartphones and their iPhones and all that, with the GPS in our phones, the technology of GPS is very, very small. The problem with owls is they're nocturnal, so you can't put a solar panel, so you're still limited by the size of the battery. But we did put some of these GPS tags on barn owls, and we saw that they would fly quite far. Well, I apologize, everything's in kilometers and in Celsius so everybody but people in the US, you probably understand what this means. I apologize about that. But the barn owls are actually flying very far from the boxes to hunt, not close like we initially thought. You'd find, 5 kilometers away to bring one, they'd fly 5 kilometers and bring one rodent. And the other interesting thing is when you look at multiple barn owls, home ranges, over a period of time, you can see that their home ranges overlap. So this is one night. And you can see the overlap between the pairs. This is one barn owl, 2 barn owls, 3, 4. You can see their home ranges overlap quite a bit between these pairs. And it's quite impressive that when you have all these pairs, they cover literally the whole area. And the interesting thing about that this is an example of 13 barn owls. In this area, there was actually, I think, 66 barn owl pairs. There's also other barn owls that don't breed. So the barn owls, they reach everywhere. It doesn't mean they hunt everywhere, but they reach everywhere. And another thing we could see with the transmitters, as you can see with a lot of the boxes like in cam 6 right now, that the adults at some point around 25 days, they leave the nestling, the male even before, but the females, she leaves them and she roosts outside the box. But it was a question, where do they roost? Do they roost next to the box, above the box? And we found that a lot of them would roost on average almost a kilometer away from the box. So even sometimes further, between 200 meters to 4 kilometers. So they would roost very far from the box. And that's why the nestlings at some point, they have to be able to defend the boxes themselves. Another topic that I'm going to go into before I finish and open up the question and answer, something very interesting that we've been studying the last few years is regarding nest switchers. A lot of times a nestling, he fledges from its nest and he actually finds himself, flies into a nest of another pair. So it used to be, we look at this as adoption because we like to look at things that are related to humans, that one pair adopted the nestling of another pair. That's one way of looking at it. But in fact, these fledglings that find themselves in another nest, like you can find this in very common, not very common, but you can find it in many different species. The nestling that finds itself in another nest steals the food of that nest and takes away the food from the nestlings of that nest so they can actually kill them. And we did a study in 2012, and we found that nests that had a nest switcher, a nestling from another box, I call that kleptoparasitic young. When they had these young, the number of young was less succeeded to fledge. So what's happening is that these foreign nestlings were probably stealing food. And the other thing is when we found that these foreign nestlings in nests with smaller nestlings, then less succeeded to fledge. And then I added a camera up. This was before the YouTube channel. I was just playing around and I added a box, and every night this pair had 6 nestlings. And these 6 nestlings that you'll see are not, they haven't fledged yet. They can't fly, but every night a nest switcher would come. He didn't sleep inside the box, but he would come. And as you would see, because he's physically larger and stronger, he would actually steal the food. Well, the internet's not working the best, I apologize. So he would come and steal the food. He's physically more developed than the nestlings of that box. So when the parents would come to bring the food, he would immediately go out and steal the food from them. And the other thing he would do would, unfortunately, would attack some of the nestlings of that box. In this case, the nestlings were quite large, so they survived it. But if the nestlings were smaller, chances are they would be killed. One sec, you'll see how aggressive this foreign fledgling was. The nestlings were begging for food from him, and he literally at some point attacked one of the nestlings. It was very, very, very aggressive. If this was a small nestling, he probably would kill it. You see here in this case, it's very, very aggressive. So what we did was we added a lot of tags on nestlings. We wanted to learn a little bit more about it. We added on 72 barn owl nestlings. One of the first cool things that we saw, these barn owl nestlings, they typically fledge around 60 days. So this one at 60 days flew 200 meters. They flew much further than what I thought a barn owl would fly. So within a few days, 370 meters, within 10 days, 1.4 kilometers from the box. So they were flying quite far away from the box. So even after this specific fledgling, after 18 days of flying, it flew 4.6 kilometers from the box and came back, which is quite amazing. And the other thing is of the 63 of the tags survived barn owls, and out of them, 49 of them visited other boxes. They went in to visit other boxes. And out of the 39 active barn owl pairs we had at that time, 35 of them were visited by other nestlings. So almost 90% of the active nests were visited by these foreign nestlings. And what we found is that the more nestlings that were in a box, the more number of foreign nestlings visited. The reason why is a box with more nestlings, the parents bring more food. The more food they bring, the better it is for foreign nestling, because the more food they can steal. So I'm sure a lot of you don't like it, I understand. But in order to learn more, we add something called a pit tag, which is basically like the tag that you put in your dog for the chip for the rabies. But instead of putting it in the body, we add it onto a ring. You can see in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a ring, a brown wing with that black smog of glue. Under that is a chip. So we can put these on all the barn owls. And then we have a setup that inside of the box, you have this entrance. That in the entrance has two antennas. Why two antennas? Because with one antenna, when a barn owl enters with the chip, it reads it. So I can know the barn owl is there. But if there's two antennas, I can know if the barn owl is entering or exiting the box, like the direction. So it gives me a lot more information. And we added stations on 25 boxes in 2020 and 26 boxes in 2021, and had almost 1 million readings, or over 1 million readings of the barn owls, which is quite amazing. And so the first thing we noticed with the data is very easy. The more nestlings they have, the more times the parents feed. I'm gonna move on. And the other thing is when the nestlings, when there's a foreign nestling in a box, like we found previously, when they enter a box with younger nestlings, then the percentage of those young that fledged is less. So when you have a foreign nestling with younger nestlings, less of the nestlings survive. The presence of this foreign nestling steals food and takes it away from the nestlings that unfortunately die. And also in nest boxes that have more nest switchers, the percentage of nestlings of that box, the fledge, decreases. So again, the more foreign nestlings, they steal food, and less nestlings survive. So this foreign nestlings, or kleptoparasitism, is quite common. It has to do with the earlier that pairs lay eggs, that better the chances of them surviving, because their nestlings will not be visited by foreign nestlings, but their nestlings can go on to visit other nest boxes. So this brings us to the question that a lot of people want to know: are barn owls monogamous? So I had a barn owl that unfortunately found a dead barn owl with a ring on it. I called my friend. He said, wow, you got to check this barn owl female. She has nestlings. So you should check to make sure to see if the nestlings are okay. So I ran to the box and I found that all the nestlings were perfectly healthy, but there was another nestling there was another barn owl in the box with a ring. So initially I thought this barn owl was a foreign nestling. So my friend called my friend again. He looked it up. He said, well, that's a female barn owl, but it can't be because she has nestlings, 9 nestlings, 3 kilometers from there. So he's like, you got to check the box with the 9 nestlings because something's weird going on. So I ran to check the box with the 9 nestlings, and they're all perfectly healthy. So what this is barn owls are very liberal. Some of the barn owls, not all of them. And when there's lots of food, the female actually leaves the male. The male continues to feed the first brood. In this case, the male continued to feed the 9 nestlings. And she went on looking for another male to start a second clutch. So they're very modern with their, so that's one thing. But then on the other thing, I had a weird phone call that a friend called me up and said, I think I found a threesome of barn owls. He asked me, how do you identify males and females? So typically males, they have less spots on their chest than females. But there's an overlap. Some males look almost like females and some females look almost like males. So you can't rely on that. So first of all, you can do genetics and see what is male and female, but you don't do that in the field. But you can also check that females developed a brood patch because only the females incubate and brood the eggs in the nestling. A brood patch is an area of their stomach that the feathers fall off and then they incubate the eggs. But I told them the females have brood patches, but this is something you can't see. When I capture a barn owl in my hands, I can see the brood patch, but it's not something you can visibly see. He called me back 2 minutes later. He said, oh, it's definitely 2 females and a male. I said, how do you know that? And he sent me this amazing picture that you can see here, the brood patch of the 2 females. Now, you can also see these two females are completely different, which I'm not going to get into this today, but barn owls, basically each one is an individual. The number of spots, the shape of the spots, the color varies. So these are two different females that he found a threesome of barn owls. The two females laid 20 eggs together. Now, as you saw in our cameras, a lot of times initially, every time the male brings food, he mates with the female. He does this because he doesn't, in between laying eggs, theoretically, there could be a different father. So, and as part of the mate bonding ritual, but after nestlings become a little bit older, he stops mating with them. In this case, he would bring prey and actually mate with both of the females, which was quite amazing. But and out of the 20 eggs, 19 hatched and 16 of them fledged. So the threesome actually fledged 16 nestling. And the last topic I'm going to talk about is a little bit nest site competition, because this is something we also see a lot in the cameras. Before I even set up the YouTube channel, we did a study, and I took barn owl boxes. You can see these are the old style barn owl boxes, and half of them I decreased the entrance to prevent barn owls from entering. And what I thought was, if you prevent barn owls from entering a box, then other birds will use those boxes. It's competition. Barn owls are the largest cavity breeders we have in Israel. They're stronger. So if a barn owl can enter, a smaller bird will not want to enter. So what we found in this study was, when it had a large entrance in the black, we found only barn owls and kestrels breeding in those boxes. But when I decreased the entrance, all of a sudden we had kestrels, but also scops owls, jackdaws, house sparrows, black rats. Obviously, black rats, they're not a bird. But this just shows that when it comes to net, at least in Israel, if a barn owl wants a box, he's typically able to kick out another bird species. And some of the smaller species prevent altogether even attempting to breed in a barn owl box, because they know that they could be usurped, kicked out at any time. And this is something we've seen in our cameras in a kind of an extreme example, again, with the pigeons coming in the boxes. People were very upset. Why did we not, the pigeons were slapping around the barn owl nestlings a little bit, and people were very upset. Why didn't we do anything? Why we didn't intervene? And I'll get into that in a minute, but in general, my rule of thumb is I don't intervene, because typically when we do this, just worse things come out of it. In this specific case, this is camera 4. The nestlings, this is from last year. The nestlings were larger, and they actually kicked out the pigeon themselves. They were very aggressive and started going after the pigeon. So the pigeon left the box. So in that case, they left the box. But what happened 2 days after the nestlings kicked out the pigeon, a nest switcher came. In this case, the nest switcher was way worse than the pigeon, because it entered the box and it would steal the food. 1 second, you'll see. This is from last year. So the nest switcher would enter the box, and because it's physically larger than the nestlings, it first initially looked around for food. And then when the parents would bring food, they're under pressure to bring as much food as possible, then the nest switcher would just steal that from them. Okay. So in this case, I knew who this fledgling was, because it was ringed by me and it had a tag, and we had the system. So here the parents come, and the nest switcher steal the food. Okay, I don't want to, I'll stop this, but what happened in this box was, one of the nest switcher ended up attacking one of these nestlings and wounding it, probably puncturing its lungs, and actually died after. So this is a case, if I would have, let's hypothetically, intervened and kicked out the pigeon, then theoretically, if that pigeon was there, their chances are the nest switcher would have never entered the box. So I would be kicking out the pigeon, then the nest switcher would come, which is worse. This didn't happen in this case. The pigeons were kicked out. The nest switcher came, but you never know. There's something always worse that can happen. So in this case, the pigeons were not as bad as a nest switcher that ended up killing one of the nestlings. But the one things we learned about these pigeons are they never give up. And after the barn owls fledged the box, the pigeons entered. and they raised 2 broods. But again, the pigeons are also between themselves, there's competition. And within the brood, another pigeon, as unfortunately we remember as Agnes, she came in and she laid an egg next to the 2 nestlings. These were not her nestlings. So even between the pigeons, there's lots of competition. But unfortunately, there was a period of a few days, all of a sudden a barn owl came and he started killing the pigeons. I think he killed like 3 pigeons in a few nights. It was very unusual. And since then, we haven't seen it happen. But again, even after this happened, 3 pigeons being killed, the pigeons again returned again. These pigeons, they're unbelievable. I have a complete respect for them. But unfortunately, what the barn owls couldn't do, like this is Agnes, one of the adults, the one that laid the egg before. Unfortunately, I'm not gonna show this too much. Unfortunately, the myna, which is an invasive species, killed definitely the male, and unfortunately, I believe also the female. So the myna came, this is the same box, came in. And these myna they're beautiful birds, they're beautiful sons, but they're invasive in Israel and cause lots and lots of problems. Luckily, though, the myna are afraid of the barn owls, and the barn owls did eventually coming to the box in the end of April and kicking out the myna. This is a lot of drama in one box. And as I said, there's many other boxes here in this area, but for some reason, they sometimes select specific boxes. So just a couple last things. As a rule of thumb, we try not to intervene. Birds, they've evolved to succeed, and they succeed very well. Humans, we like to help them, but a lot of times our intervention doesn't help. We have the best intentions in mind, but a lot of times we can do worse than good. And the main thing about this is feeding nestlings. So unfortunately, the barn owls raise the maximum amount of nestlings they can. If a barn owl is unable to raise nestlings inside of the box, it means there's not enough food outside of the box. So if we were to feed nestlings and fatten them up and give them enough food, when they fledge, there's not going to be enough food outside. So we would actually be delaying the process of these birds dying. And in the worst way to die is starvation when you're older outside of the box. So we don't intervene. This is nature. Unfortunately, these smaller nestlings die, and then their siblings eat them. It's part of the life cycle of these barn owls. The other thing a lot of people say is that our nest boxes are very dirty. I've been researching barn owls for years and other birds of prey. I've never seen one clean natural nest. It doesn't exist. These birds, they live in these boxes with dead rodents and pellets. It's disgusting for us. That's the way they've evolved to live. Nobody comes in nature to clean these boxes. It's the way it is. And the insects in these boxes, it's actually an environment within an environment. And a lot of them have a role to break down the decaying and old prey remains. So I understand it's disgusting looking. I did not make barn owls evolve this way. That's just the way they are. They do not have a sense of smell, a very developed sense of smell, so it doesn't bother them. And we do definitely clean the boxes. We do it once a year. We clean the boxes, which is a disgusting thing for us, but we do it once a year, and that's it. Typically after the nestlings fledge, we clean them out. And then one last thing I want to say before I get to the questions is also people say about mosquitoes. The mosquitoes, they're mosquitoes, you find them in nature. Everywhere in this area, there's mosquitoes, but we have yet to see a box where the mosquitoes have killed the owls. They're there. They don't seem to bother the owls as much as they would bother us. And we don't spray the boxes because the whole idea of the barn owl project is to reduce the use of rodenticides, pesticides. So if we were to spray the box, it would be going against the whole idea of the project. And by spraying, using insecticides to kill mosquitoes, would also kill. There's actually a lot of beneficial insects in those boxes that have a role to decompose all the remains and stuff like that. So again, we don't intervene. In the barn owls, we're able to deal with the mosquitoes before I was born, before everybody was born. So again, I want to thank just everybody and specifically all the moderators and everybody for their participation. And now I'm going to open this up for some questions. I really hope you're able to hear me. One just quick second, I gotta open up the, one sec. So I'm gonna try to answer questions. Let's see if they sent me. No. So I'm going to try to see if I can read some of these questions and ask. So somebody wrote, do we encourage installation nest boxes in rural areas? 100% no. And the reason why is barn owls, they live in open landscapes. And as I showed you, barn owls with, for example, cars doesn't go well. And there's many roadkills. So barn owls, they prefer the open landscapes. And in rural, in urban areas, in villages and stuff, it doesn't work as well. So even I live in a village, and a lot of the nest, Camp 2 is in a village. So even a barn owl that lives in a village actually hunts in the fields next to it. So using the barn owl as biological pest control, if you add a barn owl box next to your house, chances are the barn owl is actually going to hunt further away, and he's not going to reduce the number of rodents around the box. He's going to fly a few hundred meters, even a kilometer, mile away to open landscape where it's easy for him to help. So it won't actually help the area around the nest box. Let's see what else. So where did the fledglings leave after the box? This is interesting. There's something we're still studying. We don't have all the answers. That's the one thing I want to say. But there's a huge variation. Some of the nestlings, you can actually see them with the translator stuff. Some of them stay even 6 months within close proximity to the box. We're not sure how long the parents continue to feed them, but they definitely feed them for a period. This is extremely important because a lot of times, like rehabbers, you find an injured barn owl and you feed it and release it. But in that case, the chances of its survival is quite low. In nature, between 70, 85% of nestlings die within the first year. That's with having the parents. But if you release a barn owl without having parents, the chance to survive is very, very low because they don't have the parents to continue to feed them, something that you have in nature. But you find these nestlings, some of them fly very fast. Within 3 weeks, they can leave 20, 30 kilometers away, where others stay around. It's very diverse. So sometimes they do hang around with their siblings, and also groups of siblings sometimes of other fledglings they join. We've even found some crazy things of different adults with different fledglings in different boxes together. So the barn owls, they definitely interact with each other. That's something we don't know a lot about, how that really works. But as the technology improves, we'll learn more and more. So somebody asked if the difference of the breeding success of barn owls with using rodenticides and not using rodenticides. So I mean, we haven't found any difference because in an area that they use rodenticides, if they use them or illegal rodenticides or rodenticides that can kill the barn owls, unfortunately, the barn owls will die. So in most cases in Israel, we haven't found too many cases of secondary poisoning through the rodents. But in cases that exist, it was a total loss and appears completely died. And one of the problems with even trying to study something like that, because the barn owls fly so far, so even if there's an organic farm that doesn't use rodenticides, chances are the neighbors do use rodenticides. So you can't control the barn owls where they fly. But the use of rodenticides is definitely a problem. I didn't go into this as a different topic with anticoagulants, which are some anticoagulants. Rodenticides are probably the worst throughout the world, unfortunately also in Israel, that cause lots of problems. So regarding the gender, knowing the sex of the nestling is very complicated, in particular in the nest, but typically the main way is even within the nest, with the nestlings you can tell, somebody asked, it's typically, again, if they have no spots or less spots, chances are it'll be a male. If they have more, it'll be a female. but we take a lot of times some blood and do genetics and 100% know through the genetics, or we wait the next year when we capture them as adults, we can sex them as male and female to the brood patch. And when we find a male and female together, and the interesting thing about that is, as I said, typically the males have less spots than the females, but sometimes when male has more spots, then typically the females has less. It's almost like the opposites attract. It's a very interesting thing that we found in Israel and Switzerland. There's probably the most famous barn owl researcher is called Alexander Roulin from Switzerland, a professor there, unbelievable. I did a postdoc with him years ago, and he found a similar thing. So somebody asked if we're going to tag the barn owls in Chem 1. The answer is no. That's not, Chem 1 is not in my field study. We added a camera up there. We added the box in a camera there, actually. But it's very complicated. It's in a school very, very high up. But in Chem 6, as you saw, the adults already are ringed. The nestlings, we were ringed when the oldest nestling was on 53 days old in Chem 6. In Chem 1, probably going to ring the female tomorrow, if not on Tuesday. So I'll capture her and ring her. I typically wait. I wait to make sure that the nestlings are large enough before I capture the female, because I don't want to. I try to limit the disturbance the least amount as possible. But I will capture her in the next 2 days and tag her. Are there any other questions here? So somebody with so many active boxes, are there still a rodent problem? So unfortunately, or fortunately, in agriculture, the types of crops that the farmers use and grow varies between the years. So the number of rodents fluctuate. So the barn owls will never kill all the rodents. As predators, they don't do that. So you have fluctuations of rodents between the years. The idea is that the number of barn owls will help keep the amount of rodents at an economically safe area that'll hurt the farmers the least amount as possible. But there are years, there are outbreak years that you have more rodents, and some years you have less rodents. And a lot of times farmers complain, or people complain. I can see in the YouTube channel, oh, these poor nestlings. So I can say as a farmer, the best case for them is that there won't be any barn owls and there won't be any nestlings. Not that they don't like the barn owls, but when there's lots of nestlings, that's the case, there's lots of rodents. So on the one hand, we want lots of nestlings, and in order to be lots of nestlings, they need lots of rodents. But it's one of those catch-22 things. And again, we don't intervene here because the goal is not to raise the barn owls. The goal is to watch how the barn owls live and survive in nature, and they eat according to the amount of rodents around them. So if you saw in Chem 6, unfortunately, that's actually the one of the two last breeding pairs, latest breeding pairs in the Hula Valley in that study this year. There's one other pair with even smaller nestlings. So it had 6 eggs and 4 hatched, but immediately the 2 later ones died. They're just simply not able to bring enough food. And so they're able to raise as much they can. I can tell you this year in all the other boxes, Chem 6, there's 4 nestlings, but actually in all the other boxes, there've been lots of nestlings. I think above about 6 nestlings per pair. The maximum, I think, 9 nestlings. So the 2 boxes that we have the cameras in, they actually are less successful. But these are things we don't plan, and that at least in camera 4, that camera was set up since last year. In camera 6, I wanted to add a camera in a later breeding pair, so you'll get to see it as much as possible, versus adding it in a nest with larger nestlings. How do you catch a barn owl that is no longer using a box? So first of all, I've been researching these barn owls for years, and I hate capturing them. I get no enjoyment in it. For me, it's part of the research. I need to tag them. And typically when you do something a long time, you become less sensitive. I think I've become more sensitive over the years. So I don't tip, a lot of times if you see bird ringing and people will hold a barn owl and show you the barn owl, if you ever come with me, you'll almost never see the barn owl. I capture them and put them in a bag, a cloth bag. It used to be people say, why are you putting in a bag? They can't breathe. Unfortunately, since Corona, everybody knows when you put a piece of cloth over your face, you can breathe, sorry. So, but I keep them in the bags. In a bag, it's darker and they become less stressed. So I typically put them in a bag and just pull their legs out, and, ring them and measure them. So I try to keep the amount of disturbance to a minimum. Regarding capturing adults that aren't breeding, it's very complicated. And we don't invest a lot of time in this because to capture the adults themselves, this year we didn't do it too much, but if we want to capture all the adults, we have to come back at nighttime to capture the male. There's all different methods of doing this, but it's very, very time consuming. So this year we have 45 pairs. To capture 45 males at nighttime, it takes a lot of time. The females is easier, you capture them in the box. But the main thing, my main rule of capturing these owls is I leave them the way I found them. That means if I go to a box and the female's in the box, it's very important to me that when I leave, she'll be in the box. I won't flush her from the box. So it's something I'm very, very sensitive about. And I do love the barn owls. If I could save all the barn owls in the world, I would do this. But unfortunately, we're as humans, we like to do the best thing we can. And I believe the best thing for the barn owls in the long term is try to reduce the intervention as much as possible. So what did barn owls make your favorite? Well, the barn owls, throughout the world, some people believe barn owls are smart, or owls are smart, because like humans, their eyes are in the front of the head. So people say they look like in Greece, or ancient Greece, Roman times. They said the barn owls were smart. In other parts of the areas, like in the Middle East or parts of South America and India, people believe barn owls owls bring bad luck and actually kill them. In reality, barn owls are neither smart nor bring bad luck. They're owls, and the amazing thing about barn owls is their ability to survive. They have silent flight, which is unbelievable. They can fly, you can't hear them. No air force in the world has been able to reproduce the flight of a barn owl, something you cannot hear. And their ability to reproduce and raise the maximum number of nestlings is amazing. To raise 11 nestlings, they had to bring at least 22 rodents a night, at least. They brought actually much more than that. So their ability to hunt is amazing. They actually have very good vision at night, but amazing hearing. They found that barn owls can hunt in a complete dark room. Typically, they don't do this, obviously, in nature because there is some light out. But barn owls are amazing birds. But I don't know if you saw, they're sometimes not the brightest birds. And as you saw in Cam 4, when the house sparrows built a nest in the entrance, the barn owl had to figure out how to exit the box. Whereas if this was a bird like a crow, first of all, a crow wouldn't let the house sparrows build a nest in the entrance, but they would be able to figure it out quite easy. A barn owl, they're not the brightest of birds, so their problem-solving ability is quite low. But typically in nature, they don't need that. They're hunters, they know how to survive. So let's say they don't need to be the brightest of all birds, but I still love them and I think they're amazing. So unfortunately, the manual for building boxes is currently only in Hebrew. Maybe we'll translate it. The one thing I want to say about that is there's no such thing as a perfect barn owl box. One of my best friends that works with me now, Amir, used to be in the Navy, and every weekend he would find old cabinets that people would throw out, and he would take these old cabinets, fix them up, and throw them on trees. What we learned from Amir is, first of all, because of him, that they prefer to breed in boxes on trees. The other thing we learned from him, that they breed in almost anything. The location of the box is more important to the exact design of the box. So he would put some very small boxes, some huge boxes, and if it was in a good location, they're almost all occupied. But there's some basic ideas, like having the higher entrance is great because it prevents nestlings from falling. or, depending where in Israel, we need ventilation in order to keep the box a little bit cooler. So there are some tips. So maybe we'll try to translate that to English. But again, I just want to stress there's no perfect box. And I'm all for recycling. If you can recycle something, that's always the best. One sec. Is it possible to tunnel transparent? So that's a funny thing. Well, if we make the tunnel transparent, the barn owls would not be, they wouldn't understand how to enter in the tunnel. And before I made the tunnel with the tube, I actually used a cage. And the barn owls would stand on the cage and look at the entrance and couldn't figure out, or they would stand and actually in the entrance and they couldn't figure out how to enter. Again, this is barn owls. They're not the brightest of birds. So if I were to make a transparent tunnel, then chances are it would confuse them and it would cause them problems from entering. I know a lot of people, they don't like the tunnel, but I can say a lot of times when we keep the tunnel up on a box in the wintertime, those boxes are occupied more than boxes without the tunnel. So I think the barn owls actually prefer them. It could be that in the tunnel, they like the idea of having the entrance and jumping in, and maybe it's a little bit darker. So they actually prefer the tunnel. I do understand the problem with the house sparrows and all of that occupying the boxes. But again, in nature, in natural cavities, this also happens with house sparrows building or other birds building nests in the entrance or on top of the box like the myna did. It's very, very common that songbirds and other birds build nests or in actually large nests like in eagle nests or stork nests, or also in cavities. One sec, let's see here. So somebody wrote in the UK that they found that sitting in roads. So again, a lot of times we see things and we try to understand why they do this. So chances are the reason why they sit on roads is that the border roads may be a great place for rodents. And there's a place for them to stand typically. So when they have a place to stand in the rodents, they may try to hunt there. But I'm not sure. Some people in Israel said, oh, they want to sit on the road at nighttime because it's warm. It cools down at night. But I'm not 100% sure. I do know, and I've unfortunately almost myself killed barn owls, obviously not on purpose. But most of the barn owls, when they fly very low, when they see the car, they veer away at the last minute. Luckily, that happened to me. I think the problem is when you have big semi trailers and these huge trucks, then they're unable to veer away at the last second, and they hit the trucks or the cars because they fly very low, and this will be obviously will be increased when they have a prey and they're going back and forth to their nest. Though a lot of the ones that were killed are actually nestlings. We know this from the ringing, and the reason why somebody asked why do they bob their head? Well, the barn owl's ears are asymmetric. One is higher than the other. And they're actually, when they bob their head, they're actually listening and they're able to triangulate or using both of their ears, they're able to pinpoint better where the prey is. So their head is actually, they're listening, but also seeing. So it helps them more accurately identify what they're seeing and hearing. What are the predators of barn owls? So at least in Israel and also in the US, one of the main predators in Europe and Israel are eagle owls. Eagle owls are just like great horned owls in the US. They're the ultimate predators at nighttime, and they will kill barn owl, sometimes adults, but a lot of times fledglings. They're the ultimate predators, these large owls. In Israel, that's about it. You do also have, in the US, you have different mammals, and also in Europe that can easily climb and predate nestlings. We haven't found too many predations in Israel. Even climbing snakes, we typically, it's very rare. We've unfortunately found some snakes in boxes, kind of scary. There's a poisonous viper, but I believe in the other places in the US, I think sometimes red-tailed hawks also can potentially kill fledglings and other birds of prey. But because barn owls are typically nocturnal, only active at night, at least in our latitudes, then they're the main predator of the large owls. Though in Europe, in Northern Europe, because of there's less hours of night, then they're also sometimes active during the daytime, in the nighttime. We've never seen this in Israel. So I'm assuming that in those cases, there's interacting also with diurnal birds of prey. So maybe peregrine falcons and other things can also eat barn owls. So what's the average lifespan of barn owls in Israel? That's a good question. It's actually very short because the majority of barn owls die within the first year of their life. So if you exclude the nestlings and you look only at the ones that survive their first year, I think it's around 3.5, 4 years. The oldest barn owl I think we found in Israel in nature was 16 years, but the majority of them don't live that long. And we see them, and that's why when they reproduce, which they're able to do within their first year of life, nestlings that were hatched last year can reproduce the following year. They try to maximize their breeding as much as they can because they don't know how long they're going to live. And it could actually be the fact that they maximize their breeding also decreases their lifespan, because to feed so many nestlings increases their chances of, first of all, of them themselves pushing themselves too far, but also predation and other things. Somebody asked why, Joe from Toronto asked why there's a tunnel. The tunnel is we have a system as we add these chips, like the chips that you add in your dog for the rabies. We add them on rings of all the barn owls, and that tunnel has 2 antennas. So when a barn owl enters in the tunnel, the 2 antennas read the ring of the owls. And this, why do we have 2 antennas? Because if we had 1, we could know the owl was there. But if there's 2, we know if they're entering or exiting the box. So it provides us a lot of additional information. And so the tunnel was made for that. But as I mentioned, the boxes with the tunnels are actually occupied more than boxes without the tunnels. I'm not saying it's a perfect thing, and I can understand why people don't like them, but the barn owls themselves actually like them. Again, about the transparent plastic, I mentioned we can't do that. First of all, I don't think we have transparent plastic that exact side, and it wouldn't help the barn owls anyways. It probably just only confuse them from entering in the tunnel. I'm not sure if there's any other questions that I didn't answer. As I said, tomorrow we're mostly going to ring the fledglings the female in box 4, and the nestlings in box 6. I have to look. I'm not exactly sure, because we go in when the oldest one is around 53 days old. We'll go ring them, and I'll try to maybe upload one video of the ringing. This work is very intensive, and a unique thing about our channel is that we don't all these cameras. The purpose of the channel didn't add the cameras or the boxes for the channel. It's almost a side effect. And again, it's for me, I've been researching these owls for years. It's great. You know, they're beautiful. First of all, I like watching them at nighttime, and I'm actually able to learn a lot from your observations. When you write the time span, when something happens, we ourselves can learn so much about it, but it also provides you an opportunity to see these barn owls without disturbing them. I know we like to see animals, but to observe a pair of barn owls in nature, or any breeding bird in nature, our presence only affects them and disturbs them, and appear like barn owls that need to raise as many nestlings. If we were to sit outside of the box, we could potentially actually kill nestlings by being there, by disturbing the appearance. So I love the idea of that these cameras that we can see this. I understand the problem with the cameras is nature is an amazing thing, but it's harsh. If you watch like National Geographic and BBC, there a lot of things are staged because they're selling a product that needs to go out to general public and kids. So almost like in Disney movies, you have to have a happy ending. So on a lot of these, and BBC and National Geographic, you have to have a happy ending. Unfortunately, in nature, you don't have that. And nature could be really, really harsh. Just like the barn owl nestlings die, I can tell you a lot of the rodents they eat, some of them are very cute, and you can actually raise them as pets, like gerbils, and they also die. So in order the barn owls to live, the cute little gerbil dies. So it's very harsh to see these things also for me. But I can say after following barn owls for a year, the worst death is not in the box. The worst death is after when they fledge. The majority of nestlings die in their first year of life because of starvation. They're just unable to hunt and find enough food. So I know it's hard to watch. It's nature is better they die in the box as a young nestling versus dying later from starvation outside of the box. I understand it's really hard to watch. Also for me, it's hard to watch. And we try not to intervene. The only time we did intervene was this year with the myna. The myna is an invasive species. So I cannot let myna birds reproduce in my study site in particular, because once you let them, they'll just keep on reproducing. And unfortunately, if you saw the way they killed the pigeons, we have another study in another site with a songbird called great tits. It's like a chickadee in the US. In the myna predate a lot of these songbirds, eggs and nestlings, and it's a complete disaster. It's probably the worst ecological disaster we've had. And the birds have just no defense against them. As you saw with the pigeons, that these adult pigeons that were so strong that survived even barn owl attacks could not survive these very nasty and aggressive myna birds. Let's see some more questions. So will the miners leave? I don't know. So this is new for me, the myna. So if you would have asked me last year about the pigeons, will the pigeons leave? Maybe I would have said yes, but I would have been totally wrong. The pigeons stayed and then bred after. And actually, myna birds visited the Kim 4 in 2021 last year. They looked around even at the pigeons, but they didn't enter. So chances are they're going to stay around. I just hope they won't breed. As I said, they're beautiful birds. And I think in India, where they're native, it'd be amazing to see these myna. But as invasive species, they're horrible. So how many grad students? Unfortunately, right now, none. But the data of how many prey species and what prey species, the moderators are collecting them. So a lot of times your participation of writing what you see in when the barn owls bring, indirectly you're helping the research, and then we will publish a paper about this, I hope, because the data is quite amazing that we're able to learn exactly how many prey species and also which prey species are bringing through these live cameras and your participation, which is really nice and cool. So regarding, somebody asked about anything they can done to communicate to farmers the benefit of rodent controls with owls. So luckily in Israel, the farmers are quite progressive with their thinking. And a lot of times they actually come to us and ask us how to build the boxes. They understand the negative effects. Not all farmers are great, not all are bad. But the majority of them are quite, at least in Israel, quite educated, believe it or not. And they love nature. So a lot of them actually, they come and they want to add the boxes themselves. And I haven't found any farmer that wants to kill owls or anything like that. At least in Israel, I understand in other countries it's different. So because of a lot of the produce is for export, it's very important, a high regulation, sending something to the EU. They can't use specific rodenticides. So some companies, let's say Sunfrost, we have Sunfrost, the frozen vegetables. They'll tell farmers now in Israel, you have to add so many boxes. So it's quite amazing how this project has increased over the years. But we don't really have to convince farmers anymore. For them, it's an economic decision. They understand they buy a box the last 10, 15 years. The cost of the box is not that much. So they do it, and and it works. The orphan barn owls taken on the orphan baby owls are taken out of the nest back to rehab survive. That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know if the nestling survived. I can tell you, unfortunately, the majority of birds that are rehabbed and released back into nature, nestlings unfortunately do not survive. I mentioned before, nestlings that fledge from a nest with parents in nature, between 70–85% of them die. And that's when they fledge and their parents continue to feed them. Unfortunately, like when barn owls in Israel, thousands and thousands of barn owls have been rehabbed and released. Unfortunately, we almost had no recaptures of these barn owls breeding as adults. The chances of survival is unfortunately very, 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 very low. Throughout the world, this is a topic that people really do not deal with, because the majority of times rehabbers are not researchers and researchers are not rehabbers. So somebody who puts GPS tags doesn't do the rehab, and somebody rehabs doesn't know what the barn owls do after they release them. So it's a very sensitive topic. I can say an adult bird that's injured and rehabbed, adult birds survive because they know how to hunt. The problem is with all the young nestlings. So in Israel, just like other places in Europe, they do rehab them and release them. But unfortunately, I fear their survival is not the best. So the one somebody asked about camera 2, we had something very weird this year that I've never seen this, is that the female was in the box, I think like 5 months. The female's in the box and never laid eggs, but she acted as though she was actually incubating eggs. I've spoken to other people and they found this in other birds. And this is the one that we tried to have them adopt these nestlings, because we figured we had a pair. So maybe one of these orphan nestlings, we can have them try to adopt, but the female didn't feed them. She adopted the nestlings and didn't feed, and unfortunately one died. So something's weird going on with that female. And again, it goes back to when you intervene, even though we had good intentions, there's probably a reason why that female didn't lay eggs. So in nature, she's not going to reproduce. She's not going to have offspring. So it's almost the strongest of the fittest. So it's a sad thing, but it was definitely that female is a weird pair. And unfortunately, they started coming. Now the pigeon occupied the box after she left, and she started showing up in the last 2 nights in cam 2. She started kicking out the pigeon, which is kind of definitely too bad. But I've never with barn owls, I've never seen that before. That's a good question. Do they, when the barn owls, when they first meet and the barn owl, he stampers on his feet and he screams and then he aggressively attacks the female, do they do that a second time? I believe he does do the stamping and the screaming, but I think he when he has a pair before that, I don't think he does the aggressive attacking. I think that's mainly when it's a new pair and they're kind of getting to know each other. In the first couple of days, it's extremely aggressive, almost look like they're fighting, and then within 2 days, it relaxes. But I'm assuming, and I'm not 100% sure of this, so I may be wrong. I don't know everything, and I'm learning myself. That's why I love researching barn owls, because we learn new things. I'm assuming, though, is when a pair is a pair. If you look in, for example, in Florida in Cam 1 and Cam 2, sometimes the male comes and the female was with him, I think a couple times. There wasn't that aggressive behavior. But again, we'll be able to see this soon enough. They should be pairing. I think should be laying in another couple months. Unfortunately, they're not ringed, so we'll never know if that's actually the same male and female from last year. I don't see. Somebody from Switzerland, what can be done with the invasive species or minor taking away their nestling? Wow, this is a tough one. Minor birds are like one of the 100 most invasive animal species in the world. Animal meaning including insects, fish, mammals. They're very, very problematic. I don't think there's a solution that works 100% other than trying to cull all the mina, which is obviously very complicated. Unfortunately, in Israel, it's an extreme example of a country that people eat meat in Israel, but there's almost zero hunting culture in Israel. Has to do with Jews, religious Jews eat kosher food. When you eat kosher food, it has to be slaughtered in a specific way. So you can't actually, in Judaism, you can't hunt. So there's no hunting culture. So hunting is completely forbidden for most part. And if anybody hears anything about hunting, people get very mad about it. So, you're barbaric. How do you kill something? They're very upset if somebody would, we have wild boar, the population's too large. Somebody kills a wild boar, they'll be like, that person's barbaric. How do you kill this cute wild boar? Then they'll go to McDonald's and eat a hamburger. So anything that has to do with culling or killing or capturing is very complicated to do in Israel. And unfortunately, specifically with the minor, because nothing was done, the population of minor has expanded since 1999 till now. The population is so large. So I'm not exactly sure the correct solution, what can be done, but I do believe you got to try to do something, because minor birds were escaped from a bird park in central Israel. That was our fault. And the native species have no defense against the minor. They're just so aggressive and opportunistic. They breed everywhere, that if we don't do anything, by not doing anything, we're indirectly helping these minor kill other birds. And there's already been some studies. We have one ongoing study showing that house sparrows, which used to be the most common bird in Israel, in a study, different studies cited have in Israel, the breeding population dropped a lot. So these minor birds cause extensive damage by taking over cavities of other birds, but also predating eggs and nestlings of other birds. They're very, very, very just aggressive birds. And they're one of the 100 most invasive species because they're so successful. And people bring them and raise them because almost like parrots are capable to mimic and talk. So people want them as pets, but which is fine if a bird's if you like that sort of thing, having a bird in a cage, it's not how do you say, a cup of tea, but it's in a house. But if it escapes outside the house, then it can cause lots of damage, which I'm not for. So I see there's no other questions. I'm happy. I hope you'll be able to hear me. For me, I'm talking to, just like in Zoom, when I lecture, I hate it because I'm talking to myself. But at least the questions were nice. And if you like this, maybe we'll do it again and I can give a lecture, a different topic, or maybe I can bring somebody else. I'll try to convince somebody like Eagle Miller with the vultures, or Ohad Sofei to maybe give a talk about the vultures. So do minors breed? There's another question. Do minors breed year round? Do they have a breeding season? So minor, they do seem to have a breeding season in Israel, and it breed mainly in the spring and summertime. But these, it's the minor birds, they're evolving within Israel, and even like a few years ago, you'd find them only in cities, and then all of a sudden, once the cities filled up, then they go into the rural areas and in the farmland. So even with the breeding and stuff like that, we're still learning about it, but they do have multiple clutches. They breed more than once, mainly in the spring and summertime for now. And they really don't have many predators other than with the barn owl box in Kim 1. They bring tons of, they eat a lot of minor nestlings, which is very unusual. I've never found that other than that one box. I've seen some pictures, but it's very rare. That one specific box in Kim 1 is located kind of in a city, not a very downtown, but on a borderline with fields. So I guess in that specific box, they eat two things that are unusual. One is the mina, and the other thing is very unusual is lots of rats. Typically, barn owls do not eat that many rats. They eat other rodents. Rats are large. But in that box, they also ate a lot of rats, which is unusual. It's not a common thing at all. So I think we answered all the questions. And if there's something else I didn't answer, you can write it down and maybe I can respond in the chat, and we'll upload this to the channel. Where you also research other types of owls, little owls, so I've been researching barn owls for years. I've also researched long-eared owls. Maybe we'll get a camera up next year, long-eared owls, because they're very common. The little owls, unfortunately, they used to be common. They're quite rare in Israel. Unfortunately, you find them more in the deserts. In comparison to Europe, where you find them in farmland, here we don't find them enough. And tawny owls are, I think we're latitude-wise, we're quite low with the tawny owls. Because I find myself, most of my research is in farmland, tawny owls, you find them more in the forest. So there's a division between tawny owls in forest and barn owls in the open landscape. It's very rare that we find a tawny owl in the valleys, but within, like, for example, the Hula Valley, you can find tawny owls literally 3 kilometers from where the barn owls are. They're just in the forest, in the bordering forest, but they almost do not interact. There's a complete division between those species. Could the barn owls be used to limit the number of myna population in Israel? Unfortunately not. Barn owls existed here before the myna, and they don't like to eat myna birds. If you see them when they brought the nestling, they prefer to eat rodents. So barn owls, when there's rodents, that's what they'll eat. They don't like the eating birds in general. So it wouldn't be a good type of myna control. I wish it was, but if there was, then the myna probably population would have never exploded. Yeah, unfortunately, like using animals as biological pest control agents is great, but you can't always solve all 100% of the problems, in particular like with invasive species, or let's say with larger mammals. We have wild boar, which are native to Israel, but their population has grown too large because the large mammals are predators, unfortunately, are no longer exist in Israel other than wolves. So yeah, so there's not always a solution of using some sort of biological pest control, and you always have to be careful of using biological pest control, because adding a nest box, we do it only in locations where there's farmland. And in native habitat, we won't do that. For example, in the desert, we don't want to add barn owl boxes, even if there's agriculture there, because the barn owls will eat rodent species, desert species that are not rodent pests. So if we were to add nesting boxes in the desert or near the desert, then the barn owls will actually turn into pests, because they're amazing predators, and we don't want them to eat the native small mammals and rodents. Not all rodents are like bad or pests. A lot of them have done nothing to anybody, and desert species, and a lot of them are actually really cool and cute. So I'm gonna stop the stream. Again, I appreciate everybody, all your participation in the channel. And well, I guess this went very well, and we'll do it again soon. So take care. And if you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat. And even if there's specific questions, you can even write me by email. I'm not going to put my email here, but if somebody really wants to, they can find it quite easily. So I hope you all have a great evening or morning or night. And please stay tuned and watch our channel. Thank you. Take care. Bye.